Good morning, everyone. What a pleasure to be here in Berlin today. Maybe before we get started, can everyone hear me? Can you properly understand me? Yes. Okay, amazing. All right. Okay, so yeah, thanks so much for joining me today. We're starting with a bit of a nerdy talk today because we're going to start talking about machine learning and why this is important in logistics as well. So yeah, appreciate your interest in it, and feel free to also raise your hands if you have any questions, or have a look around. There's a few Parcel Perform people if you want to discuss more afterwards. So I give you a quick introduction about myself. Dana, I started Parcel Perform about 4 years ago. We're a software as a service company based in Singapore, but we also have an office here in Berlin, and we take care of the post-purchase experience. And we just developed a few kind of use cases for machine learning, so I'm very excited to share them with you today. If we talk about machine learning, the first point that you always talk about is obviously data. And I think there's no news to all of you to say data is what many people call the new oil these days. And if we look at it, there's a massive amount of data generated every day. And even more so, if we look at the vast majority of data that is available in the market, we also know that this data has been generated in the last 2 years. So now the question is, what do you do with all this data? And as advertised, I'm in the logistics space. And the logistics space can get really, really messy. And I just brought you one example, and I know you can't read it. But just to give you a bit of a view of all the different systems and kind of databases that logistics data sits in, and all the different systems that need to be integrated. That proves to be a huge challenge for all of us to make sense for machine learning, because you need to tap into all these different systems to access it and then do calculations on top of it. But another thing is very true, and I think a lot of people are employing that already, is to say, look, even though you can't make sense of all this data, and there's a lot of data in different systems around, first and foremost, you should focus on making sure that you gather all the information that you get, even though it's not standardized yet. And I think that's true for all of your businesses, whether it's the behavior of the customers on the website or the after checkout behavior. Make sure that you collect all the data to be able to later work with it. What does it have to do with Parcel Perform? As mentioned, Parcel Perform, we make sure that we can make sense of your post-purchase experience, and especially of the last mile data that is aggregated when a parcel is moving to the final delivery. So we're working with merchants all over the world, and we try to smoothen out the post-purchase experience and to drive up customer lifetime value. And I will show you in a little bit on how exactly we're doing that. What do we do at the core of our business? Is, as mentioned, we're a software company, and what we did is we integrated more than 600 different carriers. So if you look at Germany, for example, you have your Hermes, you have your Deutsche Post, you have GLS and all the other carriers. What we make sure is that we tap into all of their systems, and not only them, but 600 different carriers as well. And for the first time, we can build a global standard around the parcel tracking updates that they are giving to your customers. And why is that important? Because basically, if you update your customers after checkouts where all their deliveries are, every carrier does that on their own website and in their own standards. So it's very difficult for your customers to actually understand this. So that's how we come in. We have quite a bit of experience, been doing this globally for millions of parcels, which gives us the important edge that we need for machine learning to actually have enough data to calculate powerful machine learning modules. Let's take one step back though, because not all of you might be super familiar with the logistics processes that are around. This is what's happening at the moment, right? So you have a customer placing an order with the merchant is handing over this order to the carrier, and then a parcel is delivered. So far, so good, but I guess for those of you who actually operate an e-commerce shop, you know that it's not always that easy. And if we look at a few details here, then there's a lot of different problems that all these stakeholders in the delivery process actually face. If we look at the consumers, they have a really hard time to understand what all these delivery updates actually mean. And even more so, they have a really hard time to understand when they should be at home when their parcel is delivered, to make sure they can actually receive it. At the same time, we also have the carriers that actually don't know when they will deliver the parcel. And we all know this kind of delivery ranges from like 3 to 10 days the parcel will be delivered. One of the reasons why they give that to you is because they don't know better. There's so many external factors that the carriers can't put into their own models, and they're also not that IT savvy to give you a very concrete delivery date. And last but not least, you have the merchants, where you have very limited kind of visibility on your carrier's performance. You have a very high customer service cost because a lot of people are asking for updates. And obviously also you have very low NPS scores because this last mile, this delivery experience is something that you can barely manage because you're very dependent on what the carriers are doing. And that's where we come in. And what we wanted to share with you today is to basically the two fundamentals for machine learning. And it all starts with the right data. So you can't develop machine learning models if you don't make sure that you have all the data that you need. But secondly, to also have a standard across this data to actually be able to calculate with that. So what we do at Parcel Perform, we integrated 600 different carriers, and we made sure that we can analyze data not only when it comes to the parcels, but also to bags, to pallets, and to even containers, to really cover the entire supply chain of your deliveries from the moment a parcel was ordered to the very last mile and final delivery to your customers. And the way we standardize it is that we don't only look into the different carriers, but we actually have a look at the events that they give you. And just to give you an example, if you have successfully delivered, erfolgreich ausgeliefert here in Germany, then you would know from your own experience that every customer is calling this, every carrier is calling this event very, very differently. So your erfolgreich ausgeliefert can be erfolgreich zugestellt, successfully delivered, yay, the parcel arrived. And what we're trying to make sure is that for the first time we actually have a standard across all these updates, because only if you normalize that data, you will actually be able to analyze it and build machine learning on top of that. That also includes that we have to standardize a lot of data and languages, because many of you will not only ship in Germany, but you would actually ship cross-border. So you want to make sure that if you have multiple carriers involved that deliver stuff and update customers in multiple languages, that we also have a standard on top of that. And I'm highlighting this so much because having the right data in place is actually the core fundament for you to kind of derive machine learning models, because without having normalized and standardized data, especially when it comes to logistics events, you won't be able to analyze it and build models around it. And that brings me to the second element, which is what we want to focus our presentation on today, which is the service layer. So once you have the data in place, you have it collected, you have it normalized, you have it in one database, only then you can move to the next step of machine learning to apply this to your services and to do powerful predictions for your models. So if we take a look at how we do this, right? So we at Parcel Perform basically have a lot of input data into our machine learning models that we can work with. One is the customer data, who is actually shopping. The second one is the order data, so we know what they actually have ordered. But more importantly, we have the carrier data, so how do these parcels behave, when are they actually delivered? And we have the engagement data, and that's a very important one because we would know how often your customers are looking for a tracking update. We would know by what time they're actually at home to receive the parcels. And that's a very important input factor for you to optimize your logistics setup. And then at the same time, for us to be able to optimize our machine learning modules, we can mainly look at only the measurable impacts. So obviously we know that many of you would look at the immeasurable input factors. You want to promote loyalty, advocacy, your brand equity. But if you employ machine learning, then you have to measure against something that helps you to then, from there onwards, optimize your predictions. And the stuff that we measure against are things like delivery performance. So what's the speed, but also the success of delivery? What's the customer sentiment? So we actually asked every single customer after a delivery how well they perceived the delivery process and how happy they are with it. So for the first time, we can also measure an NPS score for the actual last mile delivery. And last but not least, repeat sales. Because what we also know is that if the delivery fails, if the parcel is broken or the parcel never arrives, what usually happens is that your end consumer thinks it's the fault of the merchant. So they stop buying. So repeat sales is a very important input factor for us to be able to calculate the best way to deliver parcels to your end consumers. So for today, I think we wanted to share with you 3 very powerful use cases for machine learning when it comes to deliveries. And I'm going to start with the most important one, which is to predict logistics outcomes. Because what you really want to do is you want to update your customers in a very precise, correct, and intuitive manner on when their parcel is actually going to arrive. Because you want to avoid this. And I think this is a very familiar sight to many of you. You check on the carrier website, it might be FedEx, it might be DHL, and it says out for delivery, and now you're stuck. Because you're at home and you wait for the parcel delivery. And I guess many of you have been personally in this situation. And that's also a situation that a lot of your customers are in. But they need a better update to schedule their day, to not wait all day for the delivery to arrive, or worst case, to wait the next day for it to arrive because it didn't work out that day. And that's exactly the problem that we at Parcel Perform want to solve for you. What you see on the left side here is something that many of you might have seen already. That are actually real carrier pages to update your customers on the delivery speed and where their parcel is. And you can see that this doesn't do any justice to the nice kind of UX and UI that you have established on your websites when the customer shops at your page. So what we at Parcel Perform want to do is to replace these very ugly, very hard to understand pages with something that matches your brand, that has your logo, that updates the customer in their own language to make sure that they have a really smooth experience, not only when they shop at your web shop, but also when they wait for your parcels to be delivered. So I'm going to go into a little bit on the details on how we actually achieve this. Because what we can do at Parcel Perform, we can give very concrete and accurate predictions on the delivery dates. So we basically are able to replace the 3 to 10 days kind of delivery windows with a very accurate forecast on whether it's delivered on 1 or within 1 or 2 days. And how does this work? For our machine learning models to work, we first come to you, the merchants, and we ask you on how concrete you want these updates to be and how confident you want to be in communicating to your clients. So we ask you for your very specific requirements. So one of the very important questions is, how much of a date range do you actually want to give to your customers, right? So not the 3 to 10 days that we know from DHL and the likes, but something a lot more concrete, like 1, maybe 2, or maybe a maximum of 1 to 3 days. Secondly, we asked how conservative we should be. So basically, with a certain kind of, with a certain percentage of likelihood that something is delivered, at what place should we actually start communicating with your customers? And we really usually recommend 85% accuracy to then be able to give them a forecast. And the last one, input factor that we usually discuss with you, is the sensitivity of prediction updates. To basically ask you, should we always communicate with your customers when we know when the parcel is going to be delivered, or only when we're extremely confident? Once we have that in place, we then start giving your customers a much better update cycle on when the expected delivery range and the delivery date is going to happen. And secondly, if that is not met, we are also in a position to then conveniently update them so they don't sit at home and wait in front of their door, but they actually know when is the next better delivery date about to happen. So rather than just having the location of a parcel, for the first time we can actually give them a reliable input on when their orders are going to arrive, which is crucial, especially if you not have just the E+1 next day delivery, but complicated cross-border deliveries. So I thought I'd bring you some example data as well. One of our customers, a very big e-commerce merchant here in Europe, they used to give their customers an update window of 3 to 7 days, and they actually managed 50 different carriers Europe-wide. What we managed to establish for them is a very accurate prediction on the delivery date of their parcels with an 85 initial and 95 last prediction accuracy. So that means that we could predict the actual delivery date within 1 or 2 days time window at the initial prediction of 85%, but then if we continue to run our models and it came closer to the actual last delivery date, we had 95% accuracy. That is a lot better than what any of the carriers can do for you. Just to give you a few more details on how this actually worked, 60% of all these parcels, so of these 85%, were actually delivered on the accurate prediction date that we initially put out. So from the first time we predicted a date, 60% of all parcels were actually delivered in that time window, which means that for the customer, they only needed one update, and that was actually accurate. So they got one prediction on the parcel is going to be delivered in 1 or 2 days, and that was the correct one. For 25% of all these parcels, we initially gave them a 2 days range. So we said, okay, it's either Tuesday or Wednesday. But closer to the final delivery date, we knew exactly what date it is. And we could say, look, we know now it's Wednesday. So we sent the customer a second notification to just confirm with them the actual date, which makes their life a lot easier because that prevents them from sitting at home and waiting for it. The last 10%, and we also wanted to include this, is basically the range on when our models also might be getting something wrong. And in that case, we would send one more update to the customer to say, hey, we're either later or earlier than we initially predicted. And of course, the earlier case is a very happy case for the customers because that means that they get the parcel earlier on time. But at the same time, it's important to send notification because they might not have planned to be at home at that point. So it's very important that you keep them updated. But overall, a huge success for the merchants that we rolled out here. So they have over 50 different carriers, and instead of 3 to 7 days, they now have a very accurate kind of delivery day prediction of 1 to 2 days, making sure that the customers are not frustrated on that last mile experience after the purchase. I also brought you a few examples of how these emails look like. So what we offer is a fully white label services. So these emails are actually triggered from our system, but we plug in the merchant-specific HTML codes. So you can choose on how these emails should look like. And you can see that in here, we actually didn't give them the parcel is going to be delivered 3 to 10 days, but we were actually able to say, okay, your parcel is going to be delivered tomorrow, which is very important for good customer experience and making sure that these customers enjoy coming back and shopping at your website. The second one, and I wanted to highlight this also, is in case the predictions are wrong, at least we have the power to then send another communication, and this is another real-time examples of one of our clients, to say, okay, we're sorry, it takes a little bit longer than we estimated, but now tomorrow your parcel is really going to arrive. And that's a very powerful engagement tool for you as a merchant, because if you compare this to the normal newsletters that you might send out, where you have an opening rate of maybe 10% or 20% if you send a really powerful newsletter. The good news is that these kind of updates towards your customers have opening rates of up to 80%. So you actually catch a lot of eyeballs on the last mile delivery, and you have a lot of opportunity to build a very powerful touch point with your customers by giving them these updates in your own branding and engaging them after the purchase, and also link them back to your web store. So that's a little bit the cool stuff that we can do with machine learning when it comes to the prediction of the right delivery date and making that kind of whole customer experience when it comes to the delivery of parcels a lot more smooth and gaining trust for your web shop. There's the second use case that I quickly wanted to highlight for you today, which is what we can do for customer service. So if we look at customer service operations, then you all will know that you get a lot of inquiries on the status of a parcel instead of customers actually asking what else they can shop or how the good looks like. So what we want to avoid is that your customer service agents have a very reactive manner, right? So customers calling and only them, you can support them. What we should do instead is to use that valuable time of your customer service agent for proactive engagement with your clients. And we can do that because we know if something went wrong with the parcel. So instead of waiting for the customer to call when they're already upset, when they know that something went wrong on their delivery, why don't we turn this around? And with the help of machine learning, we know when to contact the client, and you become a lot more proactive on your customer service. And they have a lot more intuitive kind of updates towards your clients to make sure that they don't only call you when they're complaining, but they actually call you because they were so happy with the last mile delivery. So there's a few use cases that I won't go into the details, but I thought to share this with you because it's really very powerful. First of all, with the help of machine learning, you can early on identify which parcels are at the risk of having an issue in the last mile delivery chain. And you can then already early on start having some mitigation measures. So if you know that something is wrong in a sorting center and like all parcels seem to be stuck there, or customs clearance is having an issue on all the other parcels, then why not early on route it somewhere else and kind of make the customer experience a lot better? Secondly, we know how the customers like to be engaged with. So we know which customers open their emails, for example. So you can build a very powerful engagement tool to make sure that you automate notifications on the delivery status based on the preferences of your customers. And last but not least, we can also identify when is the best time to engage your customers, because you know that if they're at work, they will not be able to receive a parcel. If they are working from home, then maybe you have a very high likelihood that without a time schedule, time frame delivery, they would still be able to receive that parcel. And with the help of machine learning, we are actually able to predict that. So you can input the kind of preferences of a customer and the time he's usually at home into your delivery algorithm, and then decide which carrier has the best delivery option for your client. And that obviously makes your customer service a lot easier, because they wouldn't call and say, hey, I was never at home when this was delivered. But you can proactively reach out to them and say, what's actually your preference? Shall we hold off this parcel until you're at home tomorrow? Or proactively update them on any other options that they might have. The third use case here, and I'm also just going to touch base on it very briefly, is to make better decisions when you select a carrier. So if we look at the use cases that we touched base on, first of all, you update the customer with a much more concrete delivery window. Then you optimize your customer service to be a lot more proactive instead of reactive. But the last important step and the last important opportunity you have with machine learning is to basically choose a better carrier. Because if I asked many of you, do you actually know the real transit times of your carriers? Do you actually have an NPS score for the last mile delivery, asking your customers how happy they are with it? And can you actually make educated decisions, apart from the pricing questions, on which carrier to work with? Then most of you wouldn't have a necessarily answer for that right away. And what we believe in is that you can use the power of the right data, having standardized data across all your carriers, and machine learning to make much better decisions when it comes to the selection of the right carrier. So how does that work? We basically have a lot of input factors that go into the selection of a carrier. One is the options that you have with your delivery providers. The other one is the preferences of the customers. So putting this into our machine learning algorithm then gives you the chance to not only select a carrier based on the actual cost that they have, but on the delivery reviews. So by asking the customers of how much they like the delivery from the carrier, from the delivery guy that actually stood at the door. And last but not least, also the delivery performance, so the NPS score that you get from your clients. Putting this all together will allow you to have a smart algorithm when it comes to the selection of the carrier for a specific parcel. So this is then not only a question of which trade lane, which carrier to use on which trade lane, but to actually decide which carrier to use for a specific customer to have a delivery option that follows their preferences, to make the likelihood of the delivery at the first attempt a lot higher, and to increase the NPS score and the trust that people have when they deliver and receive a parcel on your web shop. Why is this so powerful? I think I touched base on this already briefly, but I think if you can give much better predictions on the actual delivery date, you have a much more high-value contact point with your clients, and opening rates of 80% in your own branding, gain you a lot of trust with your customers on that last mile experience. Secondly, by knowing what's actually happening to your deliveries and by proactively reaching out to your customers, you have a lot of efficiency on your customer service calls and your customer service operations, which can save you a lot of costs. And last but not least, you can of course have a much better carrier partner selection if you not only look at cost and performance, but also look at the preferences of your customers to make sure that they get the service that is truly the best service for their specific needs. Oops. Okay, so I think that was a brief overview that I wanted to give you today. There's so much cool things one can do with machine learning, but I also want to remind everyone that the first step to do powerful machine learning and to do the right predictions is to have the right data. That's something that we do at Parcel Perform, so we standardize logistics data across 600 different carriers so we can actually work with it. And the use cases that I touched base on today are of course just the first idea of all the cool stuff you can do with machine learning. But I think they can have a massive impact on your operations and on your customer satisfaction. And we would love to invite everyone to start thinking about that. If we look at the customers that we are already working with, just giving you a few impressions, I think they have learned that having the right data in place can be very powerful. People like Nespresso, when you order a shipment with Nespresso at the moment, coffee capsules, and they send you an email on when their delivery is going to arrive, then you're always very happy to know that it's actually happening today and you get the coffee capsules today. That's just one of the many examples that we have established with many of our leading brands here in Germany, but also in Europe. And we have a booth just down there. Our staff is walking around. And yeah, if you have any questions, we would love to discuss more with you and then ultimately support you to enable a better post-purchase experience for not only yourself, but also for your customers. Thank you very much.